Start with OD1, which is preparing the data. In this particular OD, we are going to talk about three key topics. One is to get data from different data sources and some of the caveats around that. How do you go and profile the data itself? And then lastly, how do you prepare your data by means of cleaning, transformation, and then loading the data, which is ready for consumption by your users. So let's get started with the first one, which is getting data from different data sources. When you think about Power BI and when you want to go and do a lot of things with it, before we start anything, let's go and review some of the key building blocks that we have in Power BI, and we will basically have the journey and we will step through all of them. Where you start is with data sets. All the different data that you source from all different data sources that you have in Power BI, they are registered as what you call upon as data sets. Once you have done that, the real journey of visualization starts with you creating a report. Now think of reports in a very simplistic term like tabs in an Excel file. You could have more than one tab in Excel. The same way, you could have multiple report tabs as well. Within each tab or within each report, you will have multiple tiles. Tiles are the rectangular objects or containers in which you place the actual visualizations. So what you do, you could have multiple tiles which can be put together in one report to give a story to your users. Once you have done quite a bit of work on this, once you have created a couple of few reports and visualizations which could be interrelated and those kind of things, when you're ready with that kind of infrastructure, that's where users can actually start combining all these different aspects together, and they can create the dashboards that they are interested in. So basically, by means of reports, you're giving all the different perspectives of data and the storytelling that you want to do to the users. And then users also have the option of cherry picking some of those and create their own version of the data story that they want to talk about. When it comes to sourcing data from all the different data sources, you could have n number of data types and data sources which are feeding data to you. It could be something like a relational data store, for example, SQL Server. It could be data which is stored in Microsoft Excel file like HR data or something like that. You could have some more advanced technologies out there which you might be sourcing data from, for example, Cosmos DB on Azure. And you also could have some of those traditional sources which are not strictly relational, but rather multidimensional. For example, you could have Azure Analysis Services or SQL Server Analysis Services for that matter. The list of data sources which can be feeding into Power BI is absolutely mammoth. The whole reason that they can actually work together with Power BI is because of the technology called Power Query. Power Query is the biggest winner, which basically can deal with all these different data sources and can still get the data sourced in for Power BI to work with. Now, please do remember, we have study guide which will cover some of the sources that we're going to share as well. So first one that we want to talk about, you don't have to go and remember every single thing that's out there or we're talking about. Microsoft documentation is pretty huge and pretty detailed with all the different things and caveats that you need to be aware of for you to be an expert in the very specific selected steps. For example, in this one, we're going to talk about how do you connect to analysis services to source the data. This is literally one of the animation which is coming from the Microsoft documentation. And as I said earlier as well, links for all these different resources will be provided as part of the study guide. So now let's jump on to storage modes. So you have connected to the data sources, you're ready to go and bring it in. When you're bringing the data in, that's where you need to decide what kind of storage mode you want to use to store the data once it has been sourced within Power BI. You have three different mechanisms. One is import, in which case basically the data set is completely cached. It is the default mode, and as you can imagine, it will be the fastest as well. Then you have direct query, where data is never cached, and it's generally used in the cases where the data source that you're hitting is really, really massive. You don't want that kind of data volume coming in cache because it just can't. And then lastly, you have dual mode, in which case Power BI itself actually can take a note of what kind of queries you're trying to hit against your data sources, and it can decide on your behalf whether you want to have the query to be cached or the data to be not cached. So it basically takes that load on the basis of what kind of query mechanism you're using, what kind of queries you're running against the data source. Now, please do note that selecting the right storage mode, as you can imagine, will be very important, because that will help the overall performance of your data solution, and that's going to give great advantage or problems later on in your journey. So just be conscious of these things, and please do review some of more content in this regard. So here we're going to talk about some of the key points, for example, which is listed on Microsoft documentation site again, which talks about how do you manage your storage mode in Power BI. Again, this will be provided in your documentation in the study guide. And one of the key things, for example, I do want to call out, for example, is that you can't use composite modes when you're using, say, Azure Analysis Services or SQL Analysis Services or something like SAP, HANA, or BW systems. So now let's get on to optimizing performance in Power Query. As you can imagine, performance and performance tuning is a massive, massive topic. And you can't go and solve everything in one service. So you have to start with some of the basic foundational concepts. For example, let's start with other techniques. Very first thing that you probably need to think about is what all different data sources that I'm touching. What is their performance throughput looking like? What is the kind of network throughput that I can leverage in my organization or in my data solution? What is the volume of data that I'm getting, for example? Do I need to get everything that I'm looking at right now? Or should I be basically filtering the data that I need for my reporting, and that's the only data that I source as well? So all these different small steps and considerations, they actually can help you. Now, once those concepts are clear, and once you have thought about some of those things, then we can also look at some of the key features that Microsoft Power BI itself provides to you. For example, there is a query folding concept, in which case what Power BI is doing, you could be doing a lot of different data transformation and cleaning activities. And what Power BI basically does, it looks at the pattern of all those different actions that you want to take, and then translate those into simple collective SQL statements so that it's not redoing and rejigging a lot of things, which it actually can combine and do in one go. So it tries to look at those synergy scenarios and try to build that automatically. You also have a tool called Query Diagnostics, which can actually help you analyze where you're spending, how much time, and it actually can tell you from data perspective, and then you can target your performance tuning actions in line with that. And then lastly, one of the things that we have to be aware of, irrespective of how much we try, we probably are looking at the best data sources available, all data governance is in place, all master data is in place, you have done everything in your capacity, but still there is a chance that something could go wrong. So just be aware of those things as well. Now, if an error happens, it doesn't mean that there is something fundamentally wrong. It could be something as simple as that you're trying to source a lot of data in your system and your system is not capable of handling that much of volume, and in which case you might see some query timeout errors happening. It could also be that you're hitting a data source, and when you're trying to extract a lot of volume of the data, the system has, or system administrators have basically imposed some timeout settings, which basically kills your session or stops your session before you get the full volume that you're looking for. So you do need to work those things out. It could be something as simple as you thought you know the file name from which you need to source the data, but somebody probably went in and standardized that path, and all of a sudden the file is not locatable. So those kind of things could happen. Also be aware of some implicit and explicit data type conversions, which could cause some issues in your data collection. So you do need to figure that out as well. And then in some cases where you are working directly with Excel file, please be aware that if the data that you're sourcing, it's not formatted as a table, the system may have some issues in accessing it. So just be cognizant of that. And of course, by any means, this is not the most comprehensive list. There is so much more that could happen. But again, as I always say, try with something basic and you will figure it out. So with that, let's go into the next part, which is profiling the data. Now, when you look at the data, once you have sourced the data, right, why would it be that profiling the data or having a good relationship and everything that will help? Basically, the very important reason for something like this is because it actually can simplify the data navigation, not just for you, but for users as well. Just think it this way. If your data can be understood naturally by the users, that's less the effort that's needed on your part to go and write a big rim of documentation and those kind of things. So when it comes to something like this, those are the bits and pieces which actually can help you in the longer run. Increased readability of your data solution will make it better for the users to work with it and consume it better as well. So it's not just about less effort on your part, but also it actually increases the usability for the users, which will increase obviously client satisfactions as well. And then if you think about it, something which is simpler and readable and understandable, there is a great chance of user knowing how to aggregate the data, how to carry out some calculations, and hence overall accuracy of the results itself. Now, when you look at Power Query Editor, before we jump too much into other things, that is the most critical concept or toolkit that you need to be aware of. So if you have not spent some time with it, I highly encourage you to please go and look at it. Try to be familiar with some of the tools, some of the key items that's available. For example, there are tabs like tools, views, adding the columns, transformation that you could do, and then different other things that you could do on Home tab itself. I will not go into details on those. I would really encourage you to go and explore that a bit more. Also, please be aware that Power BI is one of the most popular products out there, and a new set of features keeps adding to it. So it helps to rejig it, relook at it every now and then, just to make sure that you know what is happening in the space. Once you have sourced your data, you don't just go and start throwing it to the users, presuming that everything is good. It pays, and it actually is a good idea, if you go and spend some time with the data itself, try to understand whether it's meeting the expectations that you yourself have for the data. So you profile the data to understand whether it's getting all the right values, whether the column profile is looking okay, whether the distribution graph is looking okay, column stats is looking okay, distribution is looking fine in terms of distinct values and unique values. All these are key concepts which you will see on the View tab in the profile itself. I will again not go into a lot of details on this, but please do note that they are all key components and built in and available out of the box in Power BI. So you can really go and leverage it and can keep a tab on top of what is happening on data quality side of things and whether you're receiving the right data or not. Further to what we saw in terms of having a quick analysis of the data, whether you're receiving the right data set or not, profiling the data also is more about whether the data is exhibiting the right level of relationship as you sourced it from the data source itself. If those relationships are not respected, if those relationships are not wrong, it gives you an opportunity to understand the gaps in your thoughts and then bridge that gap. So those are the kind of things that you will go and transform data with. You will establish those relationships which you think is going to make it better for the users to consume it. You will go and correct those relationships where you think that more needs to happen. And also be aware that it could also be an avenue for you to find out if there are any anomalies, if the relationships are wrong, if the direction of the relationships are wrong, and you catch those issues early rather than it going to the user, they're doing some aggregations on top and the numbers not looking good, and then they come back to you saying this is probably not right. And then lastly, let's go and focus on preparing the data itself. This is where you really go and bridge the gap where you need to. So what does that mean? I mean, if you think about cleaning, transforming, and loading, when you do standard operations like cleaning, this is where you're carrying out things like you're removing the duplicates, you're removing some errors that could be there in the data itself. You could be replacing some values, for example, nulls with something else. Or let's say there is a value which says Jan for month, but to make it all standardized, you probably might want to replace that with January, for example. Then it also allows you to do things like, header rows and those kind of things. So there are a lot of things that you could do. Very importantly, you could also do merge or append queries. So you could be joining multiple queries just to make sure that your system is performing well. Transformation also, you have a lot many different things. You could do split, merge, and those kind of things. You could do transformation for your data itself, text formatting, for example, and then change data types is the classic one. And then when you're ready, you load the data. So there are certain settings which actually allowed you to source data and not load to the report. And then there are certain avenues available for you to actually load the data as well. So all those kind of things are available which can help you. You could reduce the data size that actually goes into the reports by choosing only selective set of columns, by doing the filtering of the data, and in some cases by using parameters, for example. All these are available, and these are good points to be aware of. So again, there is a good documentation resource, which I highly encourage you to explore a bit more on how to use Power Query Editor to really go and leverage the power that is available for you to do these things. So in this particular case, for example, we just kind of wanted to outline things like doing the data type conversions, for example. You have to think about things like what precision data is coming with and what precision you want to go forward with. A good example could be, for example, if there is a column, if there is an attribute which is coming with date time as one single data set, you might want to spread that out. Maybe you're just interested in the date part of it. So there is no point in you storing the data as date time, because that will take more storage and it will increase the overall data set volume for your solution as well. So those kind of things you could really work with. Another thing that you might want to think about is, for example, decimal numbers, right? Do you want to go and fix the decimal numbers that's available in the numbers, which could really help again in storage, but at the same time in accuracy of the solution as well. Now, one of the things that it also does is it provides you an avenue to resolve inconsistencies. when you have all these different data that's coming in, obviously from source system, the name of the tables could be really cryptic. You could really go and rename them so that they actually represent the real business understanding so that the users can actually relate to it better, right? You could do things like replacing values. For example, I talked about Jan to January, right? There could be two tables which have this kind of a combination, and just imagine one coming with Jan, another one coming with January. There is no way that you can relate those two tables. So only way for you to do that is basically by replacing value in one of them, and again, let's say call them from Jan to January, and then all of a sudden you are able to relate these two tables together, and that can actually help in the aggregations and the calculations that the users might be interested in doing, basically. Replacing null values. It looks really straightforward from the outside. My recommendation is always work with the business to understand what is the right value to replace null with. And this is really a business discussion rather than technical discussion. So just explore that a bit more as well. And lastly, also removing duplicates. A lot of times, question come back with is, well, the data is already good from the data source. What do you mean by removing duplicates? Remember that in Power BI, to reduce your data volume itself, you actually have an option to choose certain columns only if you want. And the selective set of columns that you worked with, there is a good chance that the identified columns have been taken away, and that probably might lead you to have records or number of rows which probably are duplicates. So removing duplicates is going to help you in reducing the data size, at the same time data quality itself as well. So again, there are many other options available. Please go and explore that a bit more. This is something which is going to help in calculations, it's going to help in hierarchies, and when customers and users do go about their own business of creating their own calculations as well. So this is again one of the key scenarios where we're talking about how do you merge multiple tables into one query. While this screen scroll is happening, one of the things that might pop to you, why would I go and do that? Why would I need to go and merge tables? Well, there could be many reasons. One of them could be that there are too many related tables. There are too many tables with a similar data structure, but because of the volume and data size or any data solution for that matter, you probably have multiple tables of the same type. So it actually pays to basically merge them together as queries. And then present that as one set to the data users. And then a lot of times you actually have multiple closely related tables as well, which actually can sit together. And it's probably better if you create one wide table with those related tables rather than having multiple narrow tables, because customers will really struggle understanding that relationship. Now, there are a couple of mechanisms available when something like this happens. There is merging and there is appending. I do appreciate and would like to suggest that please go ahead and explore that a bit more on what these are and how you can do that. Now, all these different things that's available out there, with all the different calculations that you can do within Power BI and Power Query, it uses a language called M, which is quite straightforward. It's quite powerful. And again, it's not to indicate that for you to be able to do something in Power BI or Power Query, you need to learn M as another language. No, it is very, very simple language. And at the same time, most of the things that you do in visual way gets translated in this language automatically. So you don't have to go and write it, but if you know it, that's pretty good. Just kind of, shows where you are in the maturity. If you want to look at the code itself, you can always go to the View tab, and within that, there is a Power Query Advanced Editor, which you can explore. Now, a bit of a fun fact here that there are about more than 700 functions in M as of this moment. Again, this is not an exam thing. It is just one of the figures. There is a good chance that by the time you attend this delivery, the number have already gone up. So again, just thought of sharing that.